And welcome to the November 18, 2024 council meeting / work session. I'd like to welcome everybody that's here. We do have a full council. Thank you for coming. And then this is a council work session, so we will not be taking any public comment. Please turn off your cell phones. If you would, please stand up for the pledge. I'll lead the pledge, and the invocation will be given by Councilman Andazola. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Creator, we thank you for bringing us together this evening to have this work session and open our minds and our hearts as we pray for our wonderful community here within the city of Safford. We are grateful to have our employees, our department heads, our assistant city manager, our manager, and our city clerk, and our directors. And we just ask you to please be with us tonight. We ask this through the Creator's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
No deputy directors. Okay.
And we'll go on to item number 5, Resolution R24-042. It's the general election canvass of votes. It is an action item.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a presentation of Resolution R24-042, the canvass of the general election results, which formally canvasses the results of the general election held on November 5th, 2024. The background is the Graham County Election Department conducted the general election on November 5th, 2024, with the participation of the city of Safford in the general election, was part of the regular electoral process aimed to fill the seat of one council seat for the upcoming term. During the primary election, all 3 available council seats were not filled, leaving us to participate in the general election with 2 candidates, Alma Flores and Luke Chavez. The results of the general election have been reviewed, canvassed by the Graham County Board of Supervisors and the Graham County Elections Director, Hannah Duderstadt, and require the formal canvass by the City of Safford Council. Per Arizona Revised Statute 16-642A3, the governing board of a city, town, or special district shall meet and canvass the election not less than 6 days and not more than 20 days following the election. The numbers on the general election results, the total number of registered voters in the county was 20,714. Total ballots cast was 15,327, with the rate of return of 73.99%. For City Council, Alma Flores received a total of 1,957 votes, and Luke Chavez received 1,348 votes. Alma Flores received the highest votes and is declared council member-elect. She will be seated on December 9th, 2024, along with the other elected officials from the primary election. Staff recommends that the City Council adopt Resolution R24-042 to complete the canvass of votes for the general election held on November 5th, 2024, and declaring Alma Flores the elected council member. And for this, I stand with any questions.
May I make a motion that we approve Resolution R24-042, general election canvass of votes?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Resolution R24-042. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It carries.
This completes the approval of Resolution R24-042, a resolution of the Mayor and City Council of the City of Safford, Graham County, Arizona, canvassing the general election held on November 5th, 2024. Thank you.
And we'll move on to item number 6. We'll announce that the regular meeting will be closed, and we will reconvene into a work session. Number 7, the work session. Number 1, intergovernmental agreements and not-for-profit contracts. Oy.
So, Mayor and members of council, I want to open with some introductory remarks, and then once I'm done reading, I'll turn it over to Matthew and to Troy to make the presentation. As City Council knows, in recent years, staff has been approached a variety of operational and budgetary matters in a comprehensive manner. Items of note include comprehensive salary and benefits updates, city municipal code updates, various airport operational and service updates, as well as an update to the annual budget process, presentation style, and capital budget development. More recently, staff have turned their focus to tracking capital assets and life cycle maintenance. Tonight's work session is an opportunity for staff to take the same approach as it regards intergovernmental agreements and contracts with local nonprofits. The goal is to provide a comprehensive overview of city agreements prior to the commencement of this year's budget cycle so that any action desired by council will become part of and be accounted for in that process. In some cases, based on existing contract terms, desired changes may require multiple budget cycles to implement. Examples of IGAs include the Mount Graham Golf Course, Gila Valley Municipal Court, Graham County Dispatch, and Graham County Animal Control. These agreements are characterized by provisions of services that cross jurisdictional boundaries and involve multiple governmental entities. At their heart, they codify cost-sharing arrangements for those services utilized by the affected parties in order to distribute costs across jurisdictional boundaries and to their respective service populations. They are, by definition, cooperative agreements. Currently, there is no formal intergovernmental agreement for library services. We also have agreements between the City of Safford and local nonprofits. Area nonprofits provide important services to various populations across the Gila Valley. Examples of this type include Gila Valley Boys and Girls Club, Graham County Chamber of Commerce, the Mount Graham Safe House, and the Gila Valley Samaritan Home. All these organizations have City of Safford addresses, and most have a contractual arrangement with the City of Safford for various types of support that include submarket rents in exchange for building maintenance performed by the leasee, donated utility services, as well as financial support. Lastly, the city has a community donations program supporting area nonprofits that is cash funded by the City of Safford. As part of the FY 2025 budget, City Council distributed $100,000 in cash donations. These monies have already been dispersed to various nonprofit organizations through an application process overseen by the Safford City Council. So, talking points for the upcoming presentation. Before we get started, I wanted to elaborate on topics relevant to tonight's discussion, chief among them being the concepts of cooperation and revenue sharing. These topics have come up repeatedly during my 5+ year tenure with the city, but mostly in an anecdotal manner. It is hoped that tonight's presentation will shed some much-needed light on both. Cooperation. In recent years, a great deal of discussion has revolved around the idea of cooperation. City of Safford certainly supports this concept, as we will demonstrate this evening. The challenge that is often encountered when discussing cooperation is that it is frequently discussed anecdotally or casually, making it difficult to delineate clearly how well it is being achieved and by whom. In this context, we should ask, what does cooperation look like? How often does it occur? To what degree? Is it equitably applied in like circumstances? If financial, what is the cost distribution mechanism used, and is it used in all similar situations? As municipal governments, cooperation often takes the form of the intergovernmental agreements discussed above. Often these agreements have provisions that delineate what cooperation entails, which is generally sharing of financial or in-kind resources to allow equitable cost sharing for the delivery of services that cross jurisdictional boundaries. Agreements of this type must also be properly structured and enforceable. Changes in staffing should not allow the provisions of the agreements to fall into disuse and be forgotten. There should be an obvious and continuous mechanism for enforcement regardless of staff turnover, just as we would apply to any contract or agreement with the private sector. So I've asked staff to compile data that can help to clarify and reveal how current agreements are structured regarding financial and in-kind contributions, i.e., how we cooperate with our neighbors, municipal and nonprofit alike. Using a financial contribution metric, we can clearly and empirically identify what levels of cooperation exist, who is cooperating, and in what manner. Revenue sharing. During my tenure with the City of Safford, I have also been approached on several occasions regarding the idea of revenue sharing between local jurisdictions. This has occurred in the past and is often couched in terms of how much revenue the City of Safford should be sharing with its neighbors because, it is said, the city has the majority of commercial activity and therefore the local sales tax available to share. Staff will be providing data that will shed light on this assumption and will provide local sales tax revenues and rates, property tax revenues and rates, and state shared revenue distributions in order to clarify existing revenue streams by community. Preliminary observations. IGAs are inconsistently implemented and non-uniform in their structure. This results in an uneven method of cost sharing for distribution of services rendered. 2, council may hear that some entities will provide only those services that are legally mandated. And so I would ask, what would the Gila Valley look like if the City of Safford took the same approach? No golf course, no library, no landfill, no airport. Is this what we want our community to look like? 3, whether a service is mandated or not, in almost every instance, local residents from all jurisdictions utilize services provided by a neighbor. Without an IGA for cost distribution, those services amount to a tax on the citizens of the providing community. 4, services provided by Safford in some cases have no agreement, even though the fundamental nature of those services are similar to those provided by other entities who have elaborate methods for charging for the services they provide. 5, nonprofit providers appear predominantly within the limits of the City of Safford, and the city disproportionately supports service populations financially and with in-kind assistance. 6, local sales tax revenues per resident are higher in some neighboring communities who have sought revenue sharing from the City of Safford. 7, local sales tax rates are lower in some neighboring communities seeking revenue sharing from the City of Safford. 8, local property tax rates are lower, non-existent, and or being lowered annually by communities who seek revenue sharing from the City of Safford. 9, City of Safford residents pay a county property tax and a county sales tax. 10, all jurisdictions now also receive revenues from online retail sales, which have no connection to brick and mortar facilities within any single jurisdiction. With that said, staff will now make a presentation that emphasizes the points that I've just read, and then after which we will convene into an executive session to discuss more specifics regarding the contracts I've been discussing. So with that, I will turn it over to Matthew, and he will take it from here.
Troy's going to say something first, and then I'll step in.
So I just wanted to point out what he talked about. So if you have questions, could you, for this presentation, we're going to go into revenues and expenses and very detailed. If you have any questions, possibly save those for the executive session. There's things that we'd like to talk about there that may not be open for discussion with the public. So tonight, just let us get through this presentation, and then if you have any questions that you think could be open to the public, feel free to ask them then. But if not, save them for the executive session, and we can talk about them more detailed there. So
Hard to do.
I look forward to it.
Do sometimes because you need a little explanation on a couple of points.
So we can get into that further. Let's just do that in the executive session, unless you feel like the public needs to know, so we can share it there.
Yeah, and again, if you feel like there's a slide you want to talk about it. I just want to have continuity in the presentation, but if there's, I don't want to lose the question. So if you have a question on a particular slide, because there's a lot of information here, feel free to ask it.
All right, and then I turn the time over to Matt to go through the slides.
Good evening. I guess I'm not coming through the PA. It's just a recording. So
And
if you can't hear me, I'll try to speak louder.
Before we get started, it is a work session,
Yeah.
so we can kind of mix it up.
I'll try to do this and look at you guys at the same time. But I'll just jump right in. As the city manager was saying, we're going to be going over agreements, populations, and revenues. Just want to reiterate how important these intergovernmental agreements are for the city of Safford, and distributing these costs with these intergovernmental agreements, and how these community services are really important for our community. So with that, I'm going to touch on population, revenues, the big revenues that we see in our community and like communities. We'll go over some intergovernmental agreements that we have with like communities, and then I'll draw it all together. First thing we want to go over is population. These were our population numbers as of 2021. These estimates were used in some of our intergovernmental agreements, and I will use these numbers throughout the presentation. As you see, Safford, our population estimates were at 10,324. Thatcher was 5,332. Pima is 2,921, and then the county is 17,248. That number is outside of those municipalities of Safford, Thatcher, and Pima. So the first revenue we're going to talk about is local sales tax. Safford and Thatcher both have a 2.5% sales tax rate on retail, restaurants, utilities, and hotels, and then other various categories. Predominantly, those categories have a 2.5% sales tax. Pima has a 2% sales tax rate on the similar categories. Safford and Thatcher, we both have an additional hotel tax on top of the 2.5% that we have. We've talked about the 2.5% going towards tourism and economic development. Thatcher has a similar one. Theirs is at 0.5% though. And then one that stood out to me that was different than all of the other ones at 2.5% was construction or contracting prime. Thatcher has a 3.5% rate on there, on those categories. Pima is 3%, and then we maintain ours at 2.5%. County sales tax rates are based on the Arizona revised statutes. They don't set those as local government sets their rates. We set ours through the Model City Tax Code, and we can adjust those at council's discretion.
What is contracting and construction used for?
Contracting and construction is used for, like, if someone were to build a home, it's the sales tax that is applied on the home sales, as well as some materials that are bought to build the home. There's also the category of MRRA, which is, I believe it's modification, renovation, rehabilitation, and addition. So anything that would go into that category on a home, if you modify a home, rehab a home, renovate, any additions. So any of those costs that are associated with that through a contractor, those sales tax prices would go into that category as well.
So our construction and contracting is lower than the other two?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions on this slide? So overall, for the last fiscal year, so fiscal year 24, the local sales tax that Safford collected was $10,177,073. I threw the population in there, and per resident, we collect $986 per resident in sales tax. As you see, Thatcher and Pima as well, with the same population numbers that I showed earlier, they collected $5 million, or $5.6 million, and then $1 million respectively. Their dollar per resident that they collect in sales tax is $1,000 for Thatcher, or $1,055 for Thatcher, and then $351. So based on these, it shows that Thatcher collects about $69 more per resident than we do. And then Pima, with a lower sales tax rate, does not collect as much per resident. These also don't include the state or the county sales tax numbers. Again, the county has a larger taxing profile, so their sales tax rate is much different than ours. Any questions on this slide? One category that I did want to point out that was mentioned as well in John's introduction was the online local sales tax. This was a new thing. It happened through the Wayfair decision. And so what this was they established a sales tax for online sales, and this is based off of the location of the consumer where they order it to. So anything that's purchased online as a marketplace facilitator, so your Wayfair, your Amazon, even your Walmart.com, all of those large marketplace facilitated warehouses who deliver to the consumer, they base it off of the rate of where the consumer's address is. So it has nothing to do with the location of where the warehouse is or where it's being delivered from. So this was a little bit eye-opening for me when I saw this. Our rates are similar to our retail rates at 2.5% for Safford and Thatcher. Pima's at 2%. But what was really interesting was that the dollar per resident that we receive is much lower than our neighboring communities based on that.
And do we talk about the level this tax is at, like the 2.5? If you wanted to move it to 3 or drop it to 1, when do we discuss that?
You can bring up the model city tax code anytime.
Yeah, as a city council, you can bring up your model city tax code anytime throughout the year. It would obviously have to go through the right process of noticing a rate change, but changing your local tax rate on specific categories, that can happen anytime.
Was that 413,000 part of the 10 million you just broke?
That was this. So this is a portion of that 10 million, or the previous slide. This is just a portion of that. Any questions on this one?
So that can be changed anytime, not like the tax levy that we do, that's only during budget.
Correct. The property tax levy is separate from our local city tax code. We'll get into that in a little bit, but the model city tax code can be changed at any time. As we were just talking about property tax, that's all for local tax right now, or local city sales tax right now. We're going to get into property tax. This is a chart of the property tax rates for the past 8 years. This is per $100 of assessed valuation, or $100,000 per assessed valuation.
Or $100 per thousand.
Per thousand. So what that means is our rate at 0.5135. If your house was assessed at $100,000, you would pay $51.35 in property tax.
Well, the market value is then dropped. It's 10% of market. So you take $100,000 house, 10% of that at $10,000, then it's $100 per thousand for the 10,000. So I don't know what that works out to, but it's not market. It's 10% of market, and then you apply per thousand on that.
So I have up here the county, the city of Safford, the town of Pima, and then the town of Thatcher, ordered from greatest to least. The county has a property tax currently of 2.1293. Ours is at 0.5135. The town of Pima is at 0.1115. And the town of Thatcher does not have a property tax. Some things I would like to point out are that the town of Pima has decreased their property tax rate since 2017. So every year. And then Graham County has decreased their property tax rate since 2019. We decreased ours in 2018, but have since maintained the same property tax rate. And that's why we do have to do a property tax levy or a truth in taxation every year, because the value of our homes is going up. So we will be collecting more based on our rate. Even though we don't increase our rate, the value of the homes go up. Is there any questions on this slide? So now we'll go into the total collected property taxes for last year. Again, by population, I have there, I put in the total amount of the county in this one because I have the total county property tax collected. So we collected $304,934 in property taxes last fiscal year. That gives us $29.54 per resident. Thatcher does not have a property tax. Pima collected $12,000 in property tax, and the county collected almost $6.7 million in property tax. So again, I also put the dollar collected per resident.
In the county, they lowered theirs this year again.
Correct.
Because they were making almost the same amount because it went up. The values went up. So they
Correct. To avoid truth in taxation, you can lower your rate in order to maintain is it the levy?
Yeah, so you, instead of changing your rate, you change, or instead of changing the levy, because the values rise, you hold your revenue constant. And if values rise, the only way to do that is to drop the rate. So they're keeping the same revenue, the levy, by lowering the rate to offset the increase in valuation.
So another large revenue category for us is our state shared taxes that we receive. For us, the largest ones we receive are state income tax, state shared sales tax, and then state shared auto lieu. Last fiscal year, we received around almost 5 million in all three of those categories. Down the line, you can see Thatcher received 2.6 million, Pima received 1.4 million, and then the county received 9 million in their state shared income tax and then auto lieu. So if we go to total state shared revenues per resident, we receive $479 per resident in state shared. Thatcher and Pima receive $496 per resident, and then the county receives around $253. So with all of the revenue categories that we just talked about, the total that Safford received last fiscal year was 15.4 million. Thatcher received 8.26 million, or 269. Pima received about 2.5, and then the county received 22.8 million. Again, the revenue per resident puts us at $1,494 per resident. Thatcher receives $1,551 per resident. Pima receives $851, and then the county receives $636. And again, that Thatcher number does not have a property tax because they do not have a property tax. The reason why I brought these three revenue categories in is because these three sources contribute 91% of the budget revenues for us in the city of Safford for our fiscal year. So this is 91% of the revenue that we bring in our general fund.
Yeah, general fund.
Any questions on revenue or population? If not, then I will get into our intergovernmental agreements. So in these upcoming slides, I tried to put every single party that was involved in the agreement, the obligations of each of the parties, and then the method of calculation for each of the parties in the contract. The 5 that we're going to go over, or 4 rather, are dispatch services, animal care services, municipal court, golf course, and then we'll talk about the library, which does not currently have any intergovernmental agreement.
So we can leave out the school agreement, fire district, things like that, they just don't come into play here?
No, not in the same way. The fire district is, it's a special taxing district, which we, along with the fire district, share. So there's different fire districts that cover different areas. The school, I'm not sure, what are you talking about there?
We just have an agreement with Safford School, but I wouldn't see it come up in any of this right now.
SRO you talking about, or?
Facility use is what he's talking about.
Oh, yeah,
So-
that's separate.
So we had talked about those in our initial discussions when we were talking about intergovernmental agreements. What we really wanted to talk about today was the method of calculation in these agreements and how they're different across the board, even though we have agreements with the same municipalities in these agreements. So really this is more to highlight how there's differences in these agreements. And we kept it to really agreements that we have with the county, Thatcher, Pima.
So you're happy with the agreement we have with the school?
Because it only affects Safford. It doesn't affect Thatcher or Pima or the county per se, but there's people in Solomon that go to Safford schools that do pay. So a little bit different, yeah. We try to focus on ones that were just Pima, Thatcher, and the county. they had involved.
So the first one we're going to go over is the dispatch services agreement. The parties that are involved in this agreement are the City of Safford, Graham County, the Town of Thatcher, the Town of Pima, and then also the Eastern Arizona College. So this is a intergovernmental agreement where Graham County provides 24/7 emergency and non-emergency dispatch services for the City of Safford, as well as the other parties that are involved. The method of calculation for this agreement goes based off of population. Those population numbers are the same numbers that I presented earlier, as well as the addition of Eastern Arizona College's on-campus housing. So as they calculated this intergovernmental agreement, they took the percentage of population and they spread it across the total cost, including direct and indirect costs and depreciation expenses for the budget of dispatch at the county. In the first year that it was adopted was FY 22-23. The numbers were shown there. And then the years after, they decided on a Western Urban CPI index inflationary factor to increase the cost of the cost to the county, Safford, Thatcher, Pima, and the college. So as we look at the current fiscal year, the contract price for us is $532,431. Any questions on this agreement?
And it includes direct, indirect, and
Yes, it includes direct, indirect, and depreciation expenses.
capital infrastructure.
The next agreement we're going to talk about is the animal care agreement. This includes everyone in the previous agreement other than EAC. So this is where Graham County provides animal care services, impounding, sheltering, adoption, and euthanasia for stray and surrendered animals captured by the City of Safford. Again, they used a population calculation and a percent of population. For this one, as you see in this one, EAC is not included. And then one point I would like to make is that this includes direct and indirect expenses. There is no depreciation expense included in this contract. Same method of calculation for the years after the original agreement using the Western Urban CPI. As you can see, this year our agreement price is $72,974. Any question?
Raise that 3% every year like the dispatch?
So no longer is it a 3% increase. That was the previous agreement prior to this 22-23 agreement. The agreement going forward is based off of the Western Urban CPI, which is an inflationary index for our region. And so I put in there, so in 23-24, we saw inflation numbers at 8%. So the contract went up by that index number at 8%. In 24-25, it dropped down to 4.3%. And as we negotiate next year, or we don't have to renegotiate, it will fall into that same Western Urban CPI number. It's whatever it is at the time of the last year.
That's what it'll be. We have no choice in that, or?
The contract is up for renewal in January of 2025.
Do we know what these numbers are set on? Do we know, is there just a
So the
small number they want to hit?
if you look in the fourth column under fiscal year 22-23, that 224,802, that was their total budget in that year, and then they spread the costs out based on population. And so then after that, it goes off the Western Urban CPI. It's not based off of the budget of the dispatch or the animal care anymore. And it was the same with dispatch. It was the budget in that year, and then the percentage of that, and then they used the Western Urban CPI to charge the different parties. So whether or not their budget is $286,590 this current year, that's what they are gathering based on the agreement.
So what's unique about these agreements, both these first ones from the county, is they could have changed staffing levels since 2022. Ours only changes by Western Urban CPI. So What's good about this contract is it allows the city to budget on a firm fixed number without controlling the county's ability to change their service level, right? So at the animal shelter and at dispatch, they've changed their service levels since 2022. We only pay the Western CPI. That's all we pay. So when we renegotiate or end the contract, that could kick in a new price based on new staffing levels. So it's important to know reality was in 2022. We've moved away from reality in the last 3 years based on a CPI index. It's not necessarily what's happening today, but that's how we pay for it.
And the other item to note is using population. Now, you could do, and we'll see this in the court, where they do population served, like how many cases each community has. The problem with that, and we found that out with ours, is that you really got to go back and revisit the prior year caseload, whereas if you use population, it's fairly consistent. So what we found is that we were being charged a percentage that had fallen into disuse and actually had gone down. But you have to keep going back and looking at the population served. So by using population as a distribution mechanism, it's more consistent over time because the population doesn't change that much over time.
The next one that we're going to talk about is the municipal court. This is where the town of Thatcher provides municipal court services for the city of Safford and the town of Pima through the consolidated GV Consolidated Municipal Court, also known as Gila Valley Consolidated Municipal Court. This includes the city of Safford, town of Thatcher, and the town of Pima. This one, as was stated, is based off of court cases per jurisdiction. Last fiscal year, or the current fiscal year, we had, well, I guess it is last fiscal year, percent of total cases was 61% for FY24. For the city of Safford, Thatcher at 25%, Pima at 13.98%. And so our expense was $300,000 with an in-kind expense, which is our internal service charges or the internal service charges that we have for our department for the court, as well as any operating expenses in kind. Thatcher has a cost of $122,000. Pima has a cost of $68,000. So the court's total budget for FY24-25 given by the town of Thatcher was $491,624.
Matt, does this include EA too, whenever they do reports too?
It all depends on where you write the ticket as a police officer. If they write their ticket to the general municipal court, the county takes it, and it doesn't go through our municipal court.
Okay.
So I believe they probably write their tickets to the county.
Okay, all right.
You say this total was given by the town of Thatcher.
This is what they budgeted.
This is what.
Another thing to note is that this court facility is owned and maintained by the city of Safford. So only direct expenses are allocated amongst the parties involved. There are no depreciation or indirect expenses that are included. Whereas in the county IGA for dispatch services and animal services, the dispatch services included depreciation and indirect expenses, and then the animal care included indirect expenses.
So do they provide us a budget so we know what they're forecasting, I guess?
Yes, every year we contact them for the budget number on what they plan on budgeting for the upcoming year for the court, and then we base our budget off of that number and the court cases in the prior year.
Have you been getting that information during the budget process?
We don't get the court cases. So this one, like John pointed out, it's been a struggle to get up-to-date court cases. I think the last report we were able to get was from 2022. So we show 61% is what we budgeted. They bill us probably closer to 66% now. So we are paying a larger share than what you see here based on the caseload that we're unable to verify at this point. So dealing with these kind of stats, you want to have something that can universally be pulled. I don't know if this is a great contract as an example of how to bill something. So we'll get into that in the closed session. We can talk a little bit more about this one.
But again, as you look at this kind of sea of information, right, the idea is you're comparing across, right? One of the first points that I made is that there's an uneven mechanism by which we enforce these contracts. So the capital costs aren't being covered, our internal service funds aren't being covered, and in fact, I don't think we really got the Thatcher municipal budget. I think I was told at 5%. I think the number was after the fact, once they passed the budget. So the answer to your question is actually no. We went digging for the court cases on our own, well, at least these two did, and we just budgeted 5% above what we budgeted in the previous year because we had no actual budget from the town to go on.
Good point. Any other questions? We'll talk about this one deeper.
Not yet.
Next one is the golf course. This is an agreement to jointly manage the Mount Graham Municipal Golf Course to provide maximum public benefit and serve as a tourism and economic asset for the region. This includes the City of Safford, the Town of Thatcher, and then Troon Golf Management as our current golf management provider. In fiscal year 25, we budgeted a subsidy, including indirect expenses of $293,100. So that is the total expenses minus the revenue. So that's not what the total budget was. And then in-kind expenses of $490,000. Thatcher budgeted $25,000 in their budget, and then they pledge an in-kind expense of $60,000. The $490,000 comes from in-kind contribution of effluent costs from the City of Safford Wastewater Department, and then for Thatcher, that is in their contract for up to $60,000 in gas and electric utility cost coverage, and then also they do in-kind of sewer and trash services.
And that's the total electric that is paid by them,
That is what they have in their agreement to pay up to is $60,000.
up to 60,000.
Up to.
And we've looked back for the last 5 years, they've never hit the 60,000. I think the highest they've ever got is 50,000 between electric and gas. But they are contracted to cover up to $60,000 is what the contract says.
And we pay the electricity on our own lift pump to send it there.
That's where you see that $490,000 of effluent. All that is our cost that we bears for our citizens, so.
Our lift station to get it there and stuff, so, and there's pumps out there and irrigation pumps and aerators and there's.
So we own all the way up to where it hits the ponds, and at the ponds, they own it from there on, the golf course.
The golf course one.
Okay.
Do we have any idea their expense of the sewer and trash?
Yeah, it's the same bill every month. I think it's almost $300 a month, so it's very small.
And again, we cover all the capital costs plus the operating deficit.
So this number does not have capital in it. This is just operating, direct operating expenses.
And again, as I stated earlier, you guys saw in the budget process this year, we came back with an actual expense for what the golf course would cost to run. This 293 is just the difference between the actual cost of what it is to run it and then the revenue that we collect at the golf course. So that's the subsidy that we have in our contract to cover is the cost. That's the difference between those two.
Well, and then in the IGA, the coverage was 200,000, right?
So
And
we are-
anything over, we're supposed
we
to
do
cover as
exceed
well.
our, in the contract, we only get, for the first 3 years, 200,000. We're well past our 3 years, and we are losing more than 200,000 every year, so.
Questions on the golf course?
We can talk more about that in closed session.
Next one we want to talk about is this facility, the library. Currently, there are no obligations by either parties, the City of Safford and the Graham County. I put the Graham County in there because they do contribute. They contributed $50,000 in this current year budget. Our current budget for the library is $886,000 in just the library general. This doesn't include the trust or the grant-funded library departments, but in just the general fund library department, the total budget this year was $886,000.
It used to be 30,000. When did it go to 50?
This year.
This year.
This year,
But
and
there
I
is
believe
no
the previous
contract that
year-
dictates that. They just decide on a yearly budgetary basis how much they want to give the library. So,
I think it's been 35, but I think Victoria actually goes to their meeting and puts in a request.
Yes, I sent a formal request to them, and I requested 55 this year, and they gave me 50. And this is the most they've ever given, as long as I've been here. I've been here about 7 years now.
And you've gone every year.
I requested every year, pretty much, yeah.
all right.
That's the last one of our agreements. Does anybody have any questions on the agreements? If not, I'll conclude the presentation. The local sales tax rates, these are some of the same points that the city manager pointed out in his introduction, but I just want to reiterate. Local sales tax rates are lower in some neighboring communities. Local sales tax revenues per resident are higher in some neighboring communities. Local property tax rates are lower, non-existent, and or being lowered annually by neighboring communities. The City of Safford residents pay a county property tax and a county sales tax, and then IGAs are inconsistently implemented and non-uniform in their structure. I also have included on here all the data sources for the data that I presented today. All of it is accessible by the public if they want to go out and find it. The tax data that I found was on the Treasury's website. The Thatcher's budget, or their FY25 budget, is found on their website. Pima's budget is found on that website. Graham County's budget is found on their website. The League of Cities and Towns publishes a state shared estimate you can find there. The county property tax data is found on the Graham County's website. And then in terms of marketplace facilitators, remote sellers, access or tax rates, these are all the definitions for those categories. If you guys want to read up more on the Wayfair ruling, it's found on that website right there, the Department of Revenue. So.
All right, Attorney General.
It's back to you guys.
Anybody have any more questions or comments that you'd like to bring up? That was a good presentation.
So just a couple of points to kind of bring it back around. As I discussed in my opening comments, basically this year we're focusing on life cycle maintenance, some asset management, and also the IGAs as a part of our overall budget approach. Like, these are areas of emphasis, hence the conversation tonight. I also wanted to address the two concepts, one of revenue sharing, which I think it's interesting that those who seek it have lower sales tax rates and reducing their property tax rate at the same time, where the most part they're building houses, which would generate that revenue. So I thought that was instructive. And then this idea of cooperation, I think, again, if you talk about terms like cooperation, they can be somewhat nebulous. Like, what do we really mean? Well, by showing in intergovernmental agreements, which by their very nature are cooperative, and by looking at the financial contributions made to those agreements for services rendered across jurisdictional boundaries, I think you're able to put a number on what that level of contribution is for those services. So the purpose was to kind of clarify, because I hear a lot of rumblings. I've been approached several times. I know it's come up a few months ago about this revenue sharing thing again. And I know there's a lot of history surrounding the Walmart facility. That's old news. These numbers show a story that facility and its impact, while still significant, is surely reflected in these numbers by showing that in some cases there are neighboring communities that get more revenue per resident than we do. So, you know, Walmart, while back in the day that might have been a topic for conversation, I don't see it as being as relevant anymore. It's a revenue generator like any other, and obviously there are other revenues being generated in other ways that are significant. So again, the point of the presentation was to have clarity and give you a comprehensive overview of these types of agreements, how they're structured, what's in them, and what the numbers are, and also to look at the various communities' ability to generate revenue.
Sir, the last portion of your opening statement, you had numbers. I'd like to have a copy of all those you had.
Sure, I can get you that.
Thank you.
So where we want to go from here now is we want to talk specifically, we'll probably talk more about some of the nonprofits. We really didn't do too much in here because they're separate entities with contracts. And so as we get into specifics on contracts and these types of subjects, we'll do that in the executive session. So if there aren't any questions or topics that you want to discuss, I would recommend that we close the work session, take a brief break, because we're going to have executive session in this room. We got a couple subjects to cover, and that'll give an opportunity for the audience to exit, and then we can reconvene and go over the couple of points that we have in executive session.
Mayor, do we need a motion?
Yeah, we do.
When we come back.
For the work session, yeah, okay,
We'll close the work session, then we'll need a motion for executive session.
okay.
So if we,
Make the motion, we go into executive session?
can we take a break first before we do?
Oh, I forgot about that, Mike.
Well, that way we'll give people a chance to leave, and
The
if
mayor
you want to
needs
use.
to close
The work session.
Yeah.
the work session.
Yeah, okay, the work session is closed, and now we'll reconvene into a regular meeting.
Yeah.
Close the regular meeting, and we're gonna take a 10-minute, break, and then we'll go into executive session.
Sounds good.
I need the motion on.
Okay.
I'll make the motion that we go
Why-
into executive session.
Do they need that
and
now?
break.
Or can they do it after the break?
We'll just do it now, so that way.
All right.
Second.
Okay, motion and second to close it, and then go into executive session in 10 minutes. Vote?